290. 20 grains.
All right, so this will be me shooting 20 grains of Winchester 296 powder. This will be with a 125 grain flat nose bullet because one of my favorite loads for the 357 Magnum is the 125 grain. Now this will be substantially hotter load because this is a 5.5 inch barrel as well as a much hotter load. That's me really just saying that this is going to continue being the same loading. I made 15 of each of these, so I'd like to see if I can find some type of consistency between all of the loadings, because that's what I like to do when you reload. Make 15 of one, make 15 of the next, make 15 of a third type, and shoot a few groups. See if you can actually get a good level of consistency between all of them. So that's what I'm doing here.
20 grains.
This was funny because this was the first set that I had shot through here, and it was actually kind of funny because the whole building shook.
Can you see that fireball? I can't. Because it's... Is it substantial? Yeah. Okay. 16 grains of enforcer. 16 enforcer.
I decided I would want to go with 16 grains of Enforcer because that seems to be right around where the peak loading was, so I'm going to try some 16 and some 16.5. You can see when you load the Enforcer loading that this is not nearly as hot as the Win 296, which is the same as H110. So this Enforcer is really good for 44 Magnum, but maybe not as good for 357. I also don't have a great amount of accuracy.
All right, now we're going to 16.5 grains of Enforcer.
You'll see here that there is a little bit less kick, but a lot less fireball. So that's something that I think is really important to see. My gun doesn't really like this Enforcer hand loading. It seems to be much better in the 44 Magnum, which I think is probably very accurate to what it was designed for. So I do think Enforcer is great because it meters extremely well. It's a very fine powder.
Now we're going with 20.5. Flat point, 20.5 grains of 296 H110, 10 yards.
I think that we're going to see a little bit more of the fireball here, but it doesn't seem to get much more powerful. But I do think that it's important to emphasize that every time you see one of these gigantic fireballs, it is about 4 feet wide. And you can actually feel some hot wind coming back in the stall when you're shooting. And sometimes you can actually feel a little bit of warmth on your face. I think that's kind of crazy. So here we have Jonathan shooting some. I like to actually try to hand it off to another shooter to see if there's anything good or bad about the hand loading. That's not just me. If he can shoot it accurately, I think then that's something that would be acceptable as a hand load for all. So in the 20.5, he wasn't as tight as my groups were, but this was also his very first time shooting this particular gun, and I had had a little bit of practice beforehand.
This is good stuff. These are my shots here, 3-1. That was the flyer first, but everything in here, 20.5. Pain in the ass of loading these guns up. I mean it, a pain in the ass. This is 21 grains, 296 H110.
Now this is a maximum load of this, and so I'm trying to emphasize that you really don't want to go beyond that. And we're going to see here in a minute that I actually do have some flattening of the primers, and they don't fill out the primer pockets fully, so I still feel comfortable shooting it. That's funny in this case because this is the very top of the loading that you want. I'm not really sure if I've calculated the amount of energy and the speed that this has, but it's got to be substantial.
The primers are starting to get a little flat, which is indicative of pressure signs, and this is the peak loading. 21 grains.
As our host has so graciously pointed out, this is at the very top of the range that I would want to see anyone shooting this. I think it's kind of amazing if you could see the fireball that's coming out of here. This is not something that I would want to necessarily use for low light situations because I believe that the fireball would be absolutely outrageous. That being said, I think it's amazing to see that this Ruger Bisley is not taking recoil very badly here. The way that that grip is engineered is just amazing to me.
Here we're going to do XTP. This is a defensive load. 20 grains XTP.
I start these loadings the same way between the XTP and the regular flat nose. What I want to do is see if they are identical between one bullet and the other, because you don't always get that when you're hand loading. I think that it's also really a good idea to check them to see, because they may not be the
Primers
same.
on the 20 grains are flattening before the others did. It probably has something to do with the cutting. We will look at that. 20.5 XTP.
Now 20.5 is probably a good in-between, and I have a lot of loadings that were set at that, and I want to see if it works the same in my Python. I did check my notes afterwards, and the Python does seem to like the 21 grains. However, the Python doesn't love the same primers that I've used here, so that's something that I'll have to look at.
That was hot. 21 grains XTP. Maximum load with a heavy crank.
This will be a great hunting load, and so I think I'd really like to see something like this being used for a carbine as well as a pistol, and you heard me talk about that a little bit earlier. So I really think, though, that this XTP at this velocity is pretty wild. We're probably punching around 1600, I think. Maybe a little bit better. This is kind of cool because you can actually see where the cylinder gap is nice and closed, and there's a big old flame.
Well, that's the accurate load.
All right.
Defense loads. 20 grains XTP at 10 yards. 20.5 grains XTP at 10 yards. 21 grains at 10 yards. This is the one to go with. Just like how we have 21 grains here.
Now you're going to see me go ahead and start with the 9mm conversion cylinder. I'd like for you to see the difference even in this gun, which soaks up recoil pretty astoundingly. It actually kind of looks like I'm shooting a 22 in some ways. One of the things that's really cool about this is that you can just plunk through the rounds really quickly. I didn't show a whole lot of my unloading the cylinder with the 357s, but with the long ejection rod in this, it's awesome. And you can hear me commenting on how quickly I can actually get these ejected, which is pretty cool because you can just plunk those little rounds all the way out, loaded or fired, and I think that's pretty cool. There's just no recoil here. I tried two different loadings, which is a 124 grain NATO and a 115 standard by BPS, what we call Monarch. And I think that if you can just see, I'm showing you how quickly you can unload this, and I'm smiling there. There's a little bit here, but I'd like to show you now a side-to-side comparison. 9mm, 357. 9mm, 357. The flame that comes out is substantial. There's no flame in this, just a little bit of smoke. One is a 25 cents a shot, one is probably $1 a shot.